Introduction. Lauren thought she had found her perfect match. After 6 months of dating, her partner seemed incredibly supportive of her career ambitions. When she mentioned wanting to apply for a promotion at work, he would say things like, "I love how ambitious you are, but are you sure you're ready for that level of responsibility? I just don't want to see you get overwhelmed and disappointed." When she expressed excitement about a new project, he'd respond with, "That sounds amazing. Though knowing how much you struggle with time management, maybe you should focus on getting better at your current role first." Each comment felt caring in the moment. He wasn't yelling or being obviously cruel. In fact, his tone was always gentle, concerned, loving. But over the course of 8 months, Lauren noticed something disturbing. She had stopped applying for promotions, stopped volunteering for challenging projects, and found herself constantly second-guessing decisions she would have made confidently before. She felt smaller, more anxious, and increasingly dependent on his guidance for even minor choices. It wasn't until Lauren mentioned her growing self-doubt to a friend who happened to be a clinical psychologist that she learned what was really happening. Her partner wasn't being supportive. He was engaging in a sophisticated form of psychological manipulation called concern trolling, combined with systematic confidence erosion. Every supportive comment was designed to plant seeds of self-doubt while maintaining plausible deniability. He could always claim he was just looking out for her best interests. The manipulation was so subtle that Lauren had been blaming herself for her increasing anxiety and diminished confidence. She thought she was becoming more realistic about her limitations. In reality, limitations were being artificially created and reinforced through carefully crafted psychological pressure that bypassed her conscious awareness and targeted her subconscious mind. This is the insidious nature of modern emotional manipulation. It doesn't look like the obvious abuse we've been taught to recognize. Instead, it masquerades as care, concern, and support while systematically dismantling the victim's psychological foundation. The hidden war being waged in your relationships. This book exists to expose the hidden psychological warfare happening in relationships and provide you with research-backed strategies to protect your mental health without becoming confrontational or creating unnecessary drama. Traditional advice about emotional abuse focuses on obvious red flags: yelling, name-calling, threats, and overt control. But the most damaging manipulation often flies completely under the radar of conventional wisdom. It's the supportive comment that plants doubt, the helpful suggestion that gradually erodes your autonomy, the concerned question that makes you question your own perception of reality. These subtle forms of psychological manipulation are particularly dangerous because they bypass conscious detection. Your logical mind doesn't recognize them as attacks, so you don't activate your natural defenses. Create self-blame. Victims often think they're becoming too sensitive or overthinking things. Compound over time. Each incident seems minor, but the cumulative effect can be devastating to your confidence and mental health. Maintain plausible deniability. The manipulator can always claim they were just trying to help or being honest. The purpose of this book is to give you the tools to recognize these patterns before they damage your psychological well-being. And more importantly, to show you how to protect yourself using strategies that don't require confrontation, arguments, or dramatic relationship upheavals. You'll learn to create an invisible shield around your mental health that deflects manipulation attempts while maintaining your relationships and your peace of mind. Who needs this knowledge? This book is written for anyone who has ever felt confused, diminished, or like they're walking on eggshells in their relationships, whether romantic, family, friendship, or professional. You need this book if you find yourself constantly second-guessing decisions you used to make confidently. Feel like you're too sensitive or overreacting to things that bother you. Notice that your self-confidence has gradually eroded over time in certain relationships. Feel exhausted after spending time with certain people, even when nothing obviously negative happened. Catch yourself apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Feel like you need permission or approval for choices you should be free to make. Experience anxiety or self-doubt that seems to intensify around specific people. Wonder if you're going crazy because your memory of events doesn't match how others describe them. You also need this book if you want to prevent manipulation before it starts by learning to recognize early warning signs, or in a helping profession and want to better understand subtle manipulation tactics. Have successfully left a manipulative relationship but want to ensure you don't fall into similar patterns again. Are concerned about protecting your children from psychological manipulation. Want to strengthen your psychological resilience without becoming defensive or confrontational. This book is particularly valuable for people who pride themselves on being empathetic, understanding, and giving others the benefit of the doubt. These wonderful qualities can unfortunately make you more vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation tactics that exploit your natural tendency to trust and care for others. You don't need to be in crisis to benefit from this information. Prevention is far more effective than recovery, and the skills you'll learn here will serve as psychological armor for the rest of your life. What makes this book different? Most books about emotional abuse and manipulation suffer from three critical limitations. They focus only on obvious red flags, they assume you can or should confront the manipulator directly, and they rely primarily on the author's personal experience or clinical observations. This book takes a radically different approach through several unique features. Focus on subtle rather than obvious manipulation. While other resources focus on dramatic abuse scenarios, this book specializes in the everyday manipulation that slowly erodes your confidence and autonomy. You'll learn to recognize stealth control, concern weaponization, reality editing, and dozens of other tactics that operate below the radar of conventional awareness. For example, you'll learn about empathy hijacking, a tactic where manipulators deliberately share vulnerable information about themselves to trigger your protective instincts, then exploit your caring response to gain psychological control. Most traditional abuse resources don't cover this because it doesn't fit the typical abuser as monster narrative. Non-confrontational protection strategies. Traditional advice often assumes you should confront manipulative behavior directly. You need to tell them that's not acceptable. This approach fails for several reasons. It can escalate conflict. It requires the manipulator to acknowledge and change their behavior, which rarely happens, and it puts the burden of fixing the relationship on the victim. Instead, this book focuses on internal strategies that protect your psychological well-being without requiring the other person to change at all. You'll learn techniques like cognitive firewall installation, emotional judo, and stealth boundary creation that deflect manipulation attempts while maintaining relationship harmony. Research-backed rather than opinion-based. Every strategy and insight is grounded in peer-reviewed research from psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics. You're not getting someone's personal theory about relationships. You're getting scientifically validated information about how manipulation works at the neurological level and how to counter it effectively. Your journey through the book. This book will take you on a journey through 10 different aspects of psychological manipulation, each examined to build your awareness and skills progressively. Think of it as a comprehensive education in psychological self-defense, structured to protect your mental health while preserving your relationships. The journey begins with the puppet master's invisible strings, where you'll understand how manipulation bypasses your conscious mind by targeting automatic psychological processes. You'll discover why intelligent, strong people can fall victim to tactics they would easily recognize if they were happening to someone else. You'll then explore when love becomes a weapon, examining how the most common manipulation tactics are disguised as care and concern. This chapter reveals how phrases like, "I'm only saying this because I care about you," can become sophisticated weapons of psychological control. The gaslighting laboratory takes you deep into reality manipulation. How manipulators systematically alter your perception of events, your memory, and even your basic sense of what's true and what isn't. You'll learn to distinguish between genuine misunderstandings and deliberate reality distortion. The Isolation Architect reveals how manipulators systematically separate you from your support network using tactics that seem reasonable on the surface, but gradually leave you more dependent on their approval and guidance. Emotional Terrorism in Plain Sight exposes how everyday emotional manipulation creates a constant state of walking on eggshells, where you modify your behavior to avoid triggering someone's unpredictable reactions. The Martyr's Crown of Thorns examines how manipulators use self-sacrifice and victimhood as control mechanisms, making you feel guilty for having needs or boundaries of your own. The Silent Treatment Torture Chamber reveals how emotional withdrawal becomes a punishment system that trains you to avoid any behavior that might displease the manipulator. The Boundary Bulldozer's Playbook shows you how manipulators systematically test, cross, and destroy your personal boundaries while making it seem like you're being unreasonable for having them in the first place. Breaking Free Without Breaking Down focuses on building your defensive capabilities. You'll learn to install what experts call a cognitive firewall, mental processes that automatically detect and deflect manipulation attempts before they can affect your self-perception. Rebuilding Your Inner Fortress covers recovery and prevention. You'll learn how to rebuild confidence that has been systematically eroded, how to trust your own judgment again after experiencing manipulation, and how to create relationships based on mutual respect rather than psychological power dynamics. Throughout each chapter, you'll encounter detailed case studies showing manipulation tactics in action across different relationship types. You'll see how the same basic manipulation principles play out differently in romantic relationships, parent-child dynamics, workplace hierarchies, and social groups. Practical exercises appear throughout to help you apply what you've learned to your own life. These aren't just theoretical concepts, they're skills you can practice and master. Your commitment to this journey. Reading this book requires courage. Not the kind of courage needed to confront someone or make dramatic life changes, but the quieter courage needed to look honestly at your relationships and acknowledge that some of your confusion, self-doubt, and anxiety might not be your fault. As you read, you may recognize patterns in your current or past relationships that are uncomfortable to acknowledge. You might realize that someone you care about has been systematically undermining your confidence, or that you've been making excuses for behavior that has been slowly damaging your mental health. This recognition can be unsettling, but it's also liberating. Once you can see manipulation clearly, it loses much of its power over you. Knowledge becomes your shield, and awareness becomes your strength. Your commitment as you begin this journey. Read with an open mind, even when the information challenges your current understanding of your relationships. The most sophisticated manipulation often hides behind behaviors we've been taught to interpret as positive. Practice the awareness exercises, even if they feel uncomfortable at first. Like any skill, recognizing manipulation requires practice. The exercises are designed to strengthen your psychological immune system gradually and safely. Trust your instincts as they become sharper. One of manipulation's most damaging effects is making you doubt your own perceptions. As you learn to recognize manipulation tactics, you'll also learn to trust your gut feelings again. Be patient with yourself during this process. If you discover you've been subject to manipulation, resist the urge to blame yourself for falling for it. Sophisticated manipulation is designed to bypass conscious detection. Recognizing it doesn't make you weak or gullible, it makes you human. The goal isn't to become suspicious or defensive in your relationships. The goal is to become confident in your ability to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate you, and skilled in protecting your psychological well-being without creating unnecessary conflict. Your mental health and emotional freedom are worth protecting. The journey begins now. 1. The Puppet Master's Invisible Strings. The hidden puppet strings of influence. The most dangerous manipulators are those who never raise their voices, never make threats, and never leave obvious fingerprints on their psychological crimes. They operate like skilled magicians, directing your attention to one hand while the other performs the real trick. These invisible puppet masters understand that the most effective control happens when their targets believe they're making their own choices. Dr. Stella began her groundbreaking research after noticing something peculiar in her therapy sessions. Clients would describe feeling off or confused after interactions with certain people, yet couldn't pinpoint exactly what had happened. This led her to investigate the subtle psychological tactics that operate beneath our conscious radar, what she termed micromanipulations. These micromanipulations are the building blocks of psychological control, working through barely perceptible shifts in tone, timing, and framing that accumulate over time to erode a person's confidence and autonomy. Unlike overt manipulation, these tactics are designed to be invisible, making victims question their own perceptions rather than the manipulator's behavior. The psychology behind this invisibility is rooted in how our brains process social information. We're hardwired to trust familiar people and to seek harmony in our relationships. Manipulators exploit these natural tendencies by operating just below the threshold of conscious detection. They understand that dramatic, obvious manipulation triggers our defenses, but subtle influence slips past our mental security systems. Consider how a skilled pickpocket works. They don't grab your wallet and run, that would be obvious theft. Instead, they create distractions, use gentle touches to map your pockets, and extract what they want while you're completely unaware. Emotional manipulators use the same principle, creating psychological distractions while they slowly extract your confidence, independence, and sense of reality. The key elements of invisible manipulation include tonal microshifts, slight changes in voice inflection that convey disapproval or disappointment without explicit criticism. Strategic timing, bringing up sensitive topics when the target is tired, stressed, or emotionally vulnerable. Reality reframing, subtle alterations to how events are described that gradually shift the target's understanding of what actually happened. Progressive boundary testing, small violations of personal space, time, or values that gradually expand over time. Emotional conditioning, creating patterns where the target seeks approval after feeling subtly criticized. Christian worked late every night for months, believing he was simply being dedicated to his job. Only later did he realize his supervisor had been using micro-manipulations, praising his commitment while subtly implying that leaving on time showed lack of dedication, timing important conversations right before weekends, and gradually reframing normal work boundaries as not being a team player. The manipulation was so gradual that Christian had internalized these beliefs as his own thoughts, never recognizing the invisible strings being pulled. The puppet master's toolkit extends far beyond the workplace. In romantic relationships, these tactics often begin during the honeymoon phase when emotional defenses are naturally lowered. A partner might make subtle comments about your friends, your appearance, or your decisions while simultaneously expressing love and devotion. They might say things like, "I love how you're not like other women who need constant validation," while simultaneously creating situations where you feel insecure and seek their approval. The brilliance of this approach lies in its deniability. When confronted, the manipulator can point to individual incidents and claim innocence. "I was just giving you a compliment. I was trying to help you improve. You're being too sensitive." This defensive response itself becomes another manipulation tactic, turning the focus away from their behavior and onto your overreaction. Understanding the neurological impact helps explain why these tactics are so effective. Chronic exposure to micro-manipulations creates a state of hypervigilance in the victim's nervous system. You become constantly alert for signs of disapproval or criticism, which exhausts your mental resources and makes you more susceptible to influence. This heightened state also makes you doubt your own perceptions, as your stress response makes everything feel more intense and uncertain. Grace described this phenomenon perfectly. "I felt like I was walking through a minefield every day, never knowing which step might set off an explosion. But when I looked around, there were no visible mines. I started wondering if the danger was all in my head." This is exactly what the manipulator wants: a target who questions their own reality instead of questioning the manipulator's actions. The progressive nature of invisible manipulation means it builds momentum over time. Like a slowly increasing weight on your shoulders, you adapt to each small addition until you're carrying a burden you never consciously agreed to bear. The manipulator introduces each new element when you're already struggling with the previous ones, ensuring you don't have the mental bandwidth to recognize the pattern. Environmental manipulation plays a crucial role in this process. Skilled manipulators create contexts where their influence feels natural and helpful. They position themselves as mentors, caring partners, or concerned friends who only want what's best for you. They might even encourage you to make certain decisions while carefully shaping the information you receive and the options you consider. The isolation component begins subtly as well. Rather than directly forbidding relationships or activities, the manipulator creates friction around them. They might schedule important conversations during times when you'd normally see friends, express mild hurt feelings when you choose others over them, or create just enough drama around social events that avoiding them becomes easier than dealing with the complications. Digital communication has opened new avenues for invisible manipulation. Read receipts, response times, and social media activity become tools for creating anxiety and control. A manipulator might take longer to respond when you've done something they disapprove of, or they might like other people's posts while ignoring yours, creating subtle feelings of rejection and competition for their attention. The most insidious aspect of invisible manipulation is how it trains you to manipulate yourself. Once you've internalized the manipulator's voice and values, you begin self-policing your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. You anticipate their reactions and modify your actions accordingly, essentially becoming your own puppet master using their strings. This foundation of invisible control sets the stage for more overt manipulation tactics. Once a manipulator has established their influence through these subtle means, they can begin to weaponize love, affection, and intimacy in ways that would have been immediately obvious and unacceptable without this groundwork. The next chapter will explore how these invisible strings transform love itself into a weapon of control. Dr. Evan draws the manipulation line. The landscape of human influence exists on a complex spectrum that ranges from healthy persuasion to destructive manipulation, and not every attempt to influence another person should be automatically labeled as harmful control. This nuanced reality has sparked considerable debate among researchers, with some arguing for a more balanced approach to understanding interpersonal dynamics. Dr. Evan presents a contrasting perspective, arguing that not all influence should be labeled as manipulation. His research focuses on distinguishing between legitimate persuasion and harmful manipulation, emphasizing that intent and outcome must both be considered when evaluating interpersonal dynamics. According to Dr. Evan, the key difference lies in whether the influence serves mutual benefit or primarily benefits the influencer at the target's expense. He advocates for a more nuanced understanding that considers cultural context, relationship dynamics, and the presence or absence of informed consent in the interaction. This perspective challenges us to examine our own assumptions about influence and control. In healthy relationships, people naturally influence each other through their preferences, needs, and emotional responses. A partner might encourage you to eat healthier foods because they care about your well-being, or a friend might suggest you reconsider a risky decision because they want to protect you from harm. These interactions involve influence, but they differ fundamentally from manipulation in their underlying motivation and execution. The framework Dr. Evan proposes includes several key evaluation criteria. Intent assessment, examining whether the influencer's primary goal is mutual benefit or personal gain at the other's expense. Transparency factor, evaluating whether the influencer would be comfortable having their tactics openly discussed and understood. Autonomy preservation, determining if the target retains genuine choice and the ability to decline without negative consequences. Reciprocity presence. Checking whether the influenced person has equal opportunity to influence decisions that affect them. Outcome evaluation. Assessing whether the results consistently benefit both parties or primarily serve the influencer. Consider the difference between a parent teaching a child about consequences and a manipulator using fear to control an adult partner. Both involve influence, but the parent's goal is the child's development and safety, while the manipulator's goal is personal control and advantage. The parent would gladly explain their reasoning and adjust their approach based on the child's needs, while the manipulator hides their tactics and resists accountability. This distinction becomes particularly important in romantic relationships, where the line between caring influence and harmful control can blur. Olivia started dating her partner, and she initially appreciated his guidance about her career choices and social circle. Dr. Evans' framework would examine several key questions. Was he genuinely concerned for her well-being, or primarily interested in control? Would he be comfortable if she fully understood his influence tactics? Could she disagree without facing emotional withdrawal or punishment? In her case, further analysis revealed troubling patterns. His suggestions consistently isolated her from support systems, while increasing her dependence on his approval. When she questioned his advice, he would become cold and distant, effectively punishing her for independent thinking. He would never directly forbid her from seeing friends, but he would schedule romantic dinners or create minor emergencies whenever she had social plans. The answers revealed a pattern that had crossed from supportive influence into manipulative control. The transparency factor serves as one of the most reliable indicators of manipulation versus healthy influence. Legitimate influencers are typically willing to discuss their methods, motivations, and reasoning openly. They encourage questions and welcome dialogue about their suggestions. Manipulators, however, deflect scrutiny and become defensive when their tactics are examined too closely. George noticed this difference clearly when comparing two relationships. His previous partner would explain why certain social situations made him uncomfortable, and worked with him to find compromises that respected both their needs. His current partner, however, became angry and accusatory whenever he asked about the reasoning behind her requests, claiming that questioning her showed a lack of trust and love. Cultural context adds another layer of complexity to this evaluation. What appears as manipulation in one cultural framework might be considered normal influence in another. However, Dr. Evan argues that regardless of cultural norms, healthy influence should still preserve the target's fundamental autonomy and dignity. Even within cultures that emphasize hierarchy or collective decision-making, there should be mechanisms for consent, dialogue, and mutual benefit. The autonomy preservation criterion examines whether the influenced person retains genuine agency in their decisions. Healthy influence provides information, perspective, and emotional support, while leaving room for the person to choose differently without severe consequences. Manipulation creates artificial consequences, emotional punishment, or coercive environments that eliminate real choice. This framework helps explain why some influence feels supportive while other influence feels oppressive, even when the surface behaviors appear similar. A friend who expresses concern about your drinking habits might use very similar words to a manipulative partner, but the underlying intent, transparency, and preservation of your autonomy create completely different experiences. The reciprocity factor ensures that influence flows in both directions within healthy relationships. Both parties should have the ability to express needs, preferences, and concerns, and both should be willing to adjust their behavior based on the other's input. Manipulative relationships typically feature one-way influence, where only one person's needs and preferences consistently matter. Outcome evaluation provides perhaps the most concrete measure of whether influence has crossed into manipulation territory. Over time, healthy influence should benefit both parties, or at least not consistently disadvantage one person. If the pattern of influence repeatedly serves only one person's interests, while diminishing the other's well-being, independence, or happiness, the relationship has likely shifted.